start. The session today is going to be about navigating and the different pathways that are available for VMware workloads and the modernization paths that are available. My name is Karen Hassin. I am a technical enablement specialist at NetApp, and I'm focused specifically for VMware workloads, supporting Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, and I will be your host for today. We want today's session to be very interactive, and for that, we have added some polls that will be launched throughout the session. And the idea is for you to give us for us to gauge our audience and understand where you're at and what you're looking for. And as always, a little bit of housekeeping, we will be sharing this recording with you. And if you have questions throughout the session, just use the Q&A box and we will be answering them. If we, at the end of the session, don't go over your specific question, we will be sending the answers specifically to you. But hopefully we will be able to cover all of the questions. So with that, let's go over what's the agenda for today. So we will be talking about the modernization options that are available for VMware workloads. We will talk about the challenges for modernizing. We will present Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, which is an amazing service that will help tackle those challenges. And we will also talk about BlueXP Workload Factory for VMware, which I'm not going to say what it is now, but it's a great service also specifically for VMware, for all workloads, but specifically for VMware, they have quite a few features. And at the end, we'll have the Q&A. So this is kind of our plan for today. And now I want to present our experts. We have a panel of experts. So the first one is Ido Geron. He's a senior product manager here at NetApp. He's supporting Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, bringing over 15 years of experience working with VMware environments. He plays a pivotal role in the continuous innovation of projects that are surrounding the FSx for NetApp ONTAP and leads new feature development for BlueXP Workload Factory, specifically focusing on VMware workloads. And our other expert is Richard Nichols. He is a NetApp cloud architect with experience across Azure, GCP, and AWS. He is currently focused on FSx for ONTAP and has been involved with this service since its inception in AWS. Richard brings a wealth of technical knowledge and a lot of expertise managing projects with special emphasis on cloud migration and management of hybrid environments. So welcome both. I'm happy to have you here today. With that, well, let's start with talking about the modernization. And we know there's been a lot of concern in the market with the changes that are being brought on by Broadcom. And I know many of you may be evaluating your VMware workloads and you're looking at the market for options, what to do. So first of all, let's start with our first poll. Let's see. Here we are. I hope you can see it. We want to know, are you in charge of managing VMware workloads? So let us know if you are in charge directly or not. And the second question is, are you considering moving to the cloud or to another hypervisor? Like what are your plans? We want to hear from you. What are you thinking? We'll give you about a minute to answer that. And then we'll continue, we'll move on. All right, I think we have quite a few answers. We're about halfway of our attendees are answering. All right, I think we see a lot of undecided people about what to do with VMware. And we have about half of our audience being in charge of VMware. So with that, let's start. Ido, question for you. What are the pathways to consider for VMware workloads?
Oh, hi, Karen. Hi, everybody. And a good question. So looking at VMware workloads and looking on customers wanting to refresh or innovate due to the recent market changes, there are multiple pathways, but we can see them converging into two main ones around VMware, let's call it modernization or transition. And one of those is actually migrating your VMware workload on-premise using a different hypervisor platform. There are many offers in the market for that. Some are popular and some additional ones. And this is a major transition path for VMware workloads. An additional path would be to actually look at this change within your infrastructure as part of a wider cloud modernization journey and application modernization journey, and actually migrate those VMware workloads into cloud as part of a wider transition and modernization effort.
So really moving to another hypervisor is not really modernizing your workload, right? It's just moving it from on-prem to another on-prem. Richard, the other path to modernize is really to move to the cloud. That's really the modernization path. Is there a difference between a VM that is on-prem and a VMware cloud instance? What's the difference?
So I'd say, the obvious answer here is location, right? But really more than that, right, is how are you managing your VMs, right? Who monitors it? How do you apply security to it? Via what methods? Who's in charge of that monitoring and alerting, right? All of these things are going to be new when you're moving into the cloud. And then how are you doing automation, right? How are people requesting VMs, right? How are they getting them, right? And so all of those things have to be answered when you're moving to the cloud, and you have a whole different security mechanism, right, in the cloud. So all of those things have to be taken into account. Now, obviously, when you go to the cloud, you have a lot of advantages with like scalability and access to new resources and new functionality, right? So all of that has to come into the picture of what you've got to think about for how a VM is going to be different in the cloud than it is on-prem.
Very important to consider. And now, once we go to the cloud, say, what are the options in the cloud? Can you give me more insight into that? What are the options?
So we basically have three options here, right? There's relocate, rehost, and replatform. And relocate is essentially just taking what's your VMware environment and just moving it on up to the cloud like as similar as possible. And obviously the main one for that, when we're talking about AWS, would be VMware Cloud. And that's essentially running VMware inside a Broadcom-owned data center in the cloud, but still having access to a lot of AWS resources. There's another one that's coming that Ido's going to touch on later that's also in the relocate, and that's the Elastic VMware Service, and we'll touch on that just a little bit. It was announced at reInvent. The other one is, I'd say maybe a little more towards the modernization would be rehost, right? And so that's where you're taking your VMware and you're moving it from on-prem, but you're taking it into AWS native, and that may be AWS native with EC2 instances, and then storage is like EBS or FSx ONTAP, right, as part of that storage footprint, right, when you rehost in that regard. And then the last one is replatform, and that one's the one that really, you're just really changing the whole way you operate for the whole stack, right, all the way from how the apps are developed, how they interface, right, whether they're using, something like containers, right? And so for that, thing, if you're moving to AWS, you might be moving into EKS from maybe a virtual machine that's running on-prem. So all of these, are kind of the three main ways that you can think about moving that data into the cloud.
Okay. And say you're considering one of those three. What would be the main differences that you need to take into account in terms of complexity, migration, expertise required?
Yeah, all of those, right, and more. So essentially, right, the ease of migration, right? So you have to take into account, right, how long do you have to implement this, right? Is your data center going away because you've lost the lease on it, right? That might affect whether you're going to go to re-platform, because that's going to be a longer term thing. You may need to move quicker, so you might want to do relocate, because the migration might be a little bit easier, because you could maybe use SnapMirror or maybe an HCX, right, to do the migration, do VM moves across from VMC from on-prem. So the migration might be faster, right? So you got to take all of those different things into account. You also have to think about, if you are rehosting, that's great. What does that look like from your expertise of the people that are going to be monitoring it, right, and managing it, right? Do they have skills in how to manage things in EC2, and how to do CloudWatch alarms, and how to deploy with CloudFormation, and how to do their automation, right? So there's a complexity there that's great, and you get all of the advantages of moving into the cloud and access all these resources, but you got to make sure that you have people that understand how to do that. So that's one of the reasons that sometimes people choose to relocate, is because it's easy to say, hey, I've got the same set of skills and I can apply those in a more seamless way. But then maybe the next step after relocate might be to then rehost, right? Once you become more familiar with the cloud and you've gotten your bearings, your understanding in the cloud. And then the last one here, right, is obviously performance, right? If you're moving into VMC, what's the performance constraints on that versus moving to EC2, right, native, right? There's some different performance plays that can come in as well. So a lot of different things can affect it, for sure.
It's complex.
Yeah.
But there's one more thing, Ido, and I think Richard touched on it a little bit earlier. There is a new service that's coming out soon, hopefully, by AWS, and it's called EVS. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. So AWS CVS was actually initially announced at last reInvent. It's December 2024, if I'm not mistaken, and it stands for Elastic VMware Service. It's actually a service run natively within the AWS cloud, within a customer VPC environment, that allows deployment of a full-blown, fully functional VMware cloud environment, VMware Cloud Foundation environment within a customer's VPC, and actually allows to extend that familiar VMware data center experience you have on-premise into cloud, and smoothly transition your virtual workloads into AWS without heavy lifting. So Richard did mention the relocate path. EVS is a very strong offering that actually enables that relocate path for those VMware workloads and for those VMware on-premise users starting their modernization journey. It's actually allowing customers to break this huge leap into the cloud into small, let's call them baby steps for the sake of discussion, and actually divide their journey into the cloud into more digestible intervals. Actually, as EVS goes GA, we will have further updates around interoperability and support, and we'll be hosting a dedicated webinar around EVS and those announcements. So please stay tuned.
Yeah, definitely. They need to stay tuned. It's a lot of new information coming out around EVS, and we'll be sharing it with you once it comes out, it's launched. After hearing all of these options, which one, Richard, do you think should be the one to consider by our audience? You have the relocate, rehost, and replatform.
Yeah, so there's no easy answer here. There's really no one size fits all. I would say that probably the biggest one to start with is your timeline, right? How long do you have to make this move? I mean, EVS is great, but it's not even GA yet, right? So how well trained is it, as I mentioned before, how well trained is your staff on using the cloud, right? Maybe you don't have time to train them, right? So to me, the timeline has a lot. And then what are your priorities, right? Or do you have to evacuate a data center? Then you may want to do the relocate, get out there quickly, right? But if you don't have to do that, you have a little more time. Maybe you can step and take some dev test environments and rehost them in the cloud and understand how the cloud operates without having to put your critical data up there first, right? So I think, and then obviously the last one is replatform. I think you can get the most, benefit from the cloud by replatforming, but it also takes the largest amount of time. So you really just have to look at your timelines. What are your corporate priorities, right? And what resources do you have to operate in the cloud once you move there?
Yeah, definitely. And what you want to get out of it, right? So let's launch a new poll. It's asking you which of the options that we've just explored, relocate, rehost, and replatform, aligns with your strategy or your plan. We added also the option of moving to a new hypervisor on-prem. Let us know what you think. But it's interesting to see what people are looking at. It's interesting. So we have a couple on relocate, a few on rehost, and some others on replatform. Yeah, I think we're pretty much split all over with this. Okay. Here I'm sharing with you guys the results. And okay.
Nice little split there, right? right along the lines, right?
Pretty much that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Ido, there are challenges when moving and migrating. Anytime you hear the word migrate, there are always challenges. Can we explore the challenges specific for VMware workloads when migrating to the cloud?
Yeah, so Karen, actually, your slide here beats me to the answer. And as you mentioned, migration is a word that raises dread with a lot of people due to the fact that it's a challenge and it has those sub-challenges attached to it. And if we're looking at cloud migration, I guess some of them are pretty unique. So the first one is around future-proofing your environment. So VMware workloads and VMware infrastructure in general hosts a lot of enterprise workloads. It's actually the beating heart of most data centers today. And when we're starting migrating those workloads, we might start with, let's call it less of importance applications, moving forward towards more centralized business critical application. And there's a real challenge in the cloud to actually future-proofing your environment. Deploy it right on day one, so it actually can scale and it can actually support the pillars laid, let's say, for migrating those early days application are built to scale and to support those enterprise business critical applications. And that leads us to actually the second challenge, which is around maintaining an enterprise class service level within a cloud. Looking at the basic cloud services and the initial days of cloud, so cloud was engineered to support a certain level of applications. And as it becomes more mature, users are seeking to move higher importance, higher business criticality applications into that environment. And actually, you need to have the correct building blocks within your cloud architecture to support the highest of service level when you're migrating those business critical VMware workloads. And last but not least, and of course not last from importance, it's cost. So cloud brings forth a new business model and a new way to actually tackle and manage cost, and cost management and governance are key to a successful cloud journey and a cloud migration project, as those can really fast and really easy spiral out of control. It's really critical to govern your cloud cost and focus on the main cost pillars within cloud, which are compute, storage, and network.
Yeah, you need to take control because it's a consumption model. It's different from what you have on-prem. And Ido, once you've migrated, what would be some of the challenges for VMware workloads after you migrated? You went over, you already migrated. Now, what would be some of the challenges?
Yeah, so when you're saying after you migrated, I guess you need to break this down into those phases where you're starting your journey and you're migrating the tier one application, and then you start stacking up and scaling up within your application stack. and migrate those into cloud. And you have the challenge of managing this hybrid cloud environment. So you have those two areas operating in a different way, hosting your infrastructure and your data, and you need to actually manage those two seamlessly as you go along through the migration journey, which can take years. And another point to mention when migrating those VMware workloads is that actually VMware, as a market leader within server virtualization, has built a pretty solid infrastructure and a pretty strong hypervisor infrastructure that provides a lot of data services around protection, around recovery, around management, and durability and availability. This hypervisor layer is actually not present within the cloud, and users need to compensate on those data services and those high-end protection services with different alternatives. Also bringing us to another challenge, which is that in some cases, the native cloud services are not fit enough to complement the high level of availability, durability, and data protection that you can get from a VMware hypervisor environment, accompanied with some additional on-premise infrastructure, and therefore you need to bring forth additional third-party solution to actually compensate on that and build a more complex cloud infrastructure. And last but not least, a bit reiterative from my last answer, but cost is again a major factor. As you're migrating, you need to keep a very tight governance on those cost elements, and you need to make sure that you frequently monitor your cost and you make cost-aware decisions as you move along within your cloud journey and as you decide what's your architecture.
So after hearing all these challenges related to moving VMware to the cloud, I would like us to talk about Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. It is an AWS service that provides fully managed shared storage built on NetApp's very popular ONTAP system. FSx for ONTAP can mitigate those challenges that we've just discovered. It can ease the migration. It can support hybrid cloud environments. It provides enterprise-grade data management. And most importantly, it has built-in storage management features that drastically reduce the footprint to minimize the costs. So let's talk about Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. Let's see first if our audience is familiar with this product. Do you or have you used NetApp ONTAP storage? And are you familiar with FSx for NetApp ONTAP, which is the AWS service that is based on NetApp ONTAP? Let's see. Oh, we have quite a few who have heard or used ONTAP in the past or are currently using it. Okay, that's great. I'm sharing the results so you will see. It's great to see that our audience are familiar with the product. Amazing. Okay, so Richard, here are the main features of FSx for ONTAP, and there's quite a few of them. Can you give us a brief overview of what FSx for ONTAP is and what are the key features that apply for VMware?
Yeah. So I'd say one of the key things right here is that like we're providing these enterprise grade features, right, that go across all of these different categories, right, from accessibility. So if you were migrating, doing a modernization or a rehost, right, you might want to have the full support of having multi-protocol NFS SMB, right, with it. But we also support object storage. So that really can like build you as a future proof, right? So that if all of a sudden you need to also access that data via objects, right, because you're taking advantage of the cloud, you have that as well, right? We have a lot of resiliency and protection, high availability, right? If you are moving into EBS, it's a great storage service within Amazon, but it doesn't have multiple availability zone coverage, right? So that's resiliency. That's that enterprise grade class, data that you can get by using FSx for ONTAP. We also have snapshots, right, which are instantaneous. Yes, you could move to EBS and they have snapshots, but they are higher cost and they're not as instantaneous, so they take time to create those types of snapshots, right? So we're really adding this resiliency, protection, accessibility, data security, right? We have some really great features around immutable storage and malware protection. We just had released that autonomous ransomware protection, right? Just got announced, right? Where you're protected from malware threats, right? With that. So there's a lot of things, and we can't also leave out, right? One of the important pillars that Ido had also mentioned was cost, right? And so with that, we have, data reduction technologies, compression, deduplication, right? You're getting all of that enterprise grade stuff with FSx for ONTAP. It's going to reduce your bill because you're going to be storing less data. We also have tiering data to the object tier, right? Cool data to the object tier, so you're paying less for your data. You don't want to put hot data. You don't want to put data that doesn't need to be on SSD because that's more expensive, right, when you move to the cloud. And so this helps keep down your cost. And then just from an operational perspective, right, if you're doing databases on-prem and you're used to taking clones of those databases to hand off to dev test, right, we have this instant space-saving clone where you don't take up any more space and only new Delta blocks are used for that, right? So we really have this whole cadre of features, right, that really help you operate in the cloud just like you were operating on-prem.
And one of the features I love about FSx for ONTAP is that we are first party. What is the difference of being first party versus getting, I don't know, whatever storage from the AWS marketplace?
Yeah. So I would say the very first thing there is that I used to work on Cloud Volumes ONTAP in my career here, and it was a really great product. But it, not being a first party service, having to do with the marketplace, the customer becomes responsible for the pieces that make up that environment, right? So they're responsible for the EC2 instances and the EBS disk, right? And even though we're putting it together for them, if there's a problem, you might have to go to several people. With this being a native service, if there's a problem with the service, you go to AWS, right? There's nobody else to talk to. And not only beyond that, right, you don't have to worry about patches and upgrades and components going wrong, right? You hand all of that off to AWS, which is a great thing. And it also integrates very nicely with all of their other services out there, right? How do you deploy it? You can deploy it with CloudFormation, right? How do you monitor it? You can monitor it with CloudWatch, right? So you get all of those native capabilities just automatically integrated into the product because it's a first-party service.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for summarizing it. Ido, another thing that I think is important to consider in that journey of modernization is that we may have some applications born in the cloud, and then you may have some applications that you're relocating, and maybe some of them you're rehosting. Like, it's not linear. I would like us to reinforce to our audience how FSx for ONTAP is the storage that accompanies you throughout the journey.
Yeah, sure thing. So Richard did mention that FSx for ONTAP as a third-party service has a lot of integration points and integration paths to multiple AWS services. So FSx for ONTAP, for example, can be attached to EKS or ECS, can be even attached to Red Hat Rosa, can be attached to multiple AWS virtual desktop services, virtual desktop infrastructure services, and can be attached to EC2 instances with multiple connectivity options, such as block storage or file storage, block storage via iSCSI or NVMe, file storage via NFS or SMB. And we all know the AWS managed VMware services that can use FSx for ONTAP as an external data store. It actually means that users throughout their transition journey, either for applications born in the cloud and use cloud native infrastructure, or for applications that are actually relocated from on-premise and are using let's call them more on-prem construct, they can all leverage FSx for ONTAP as their underlying storage layer and enjoy that same management experience, the same availability, the same durability and functionality around protection and disaster recovery. And that creates a uniform experience that actually reduces the learning curve and the learning overhead, allows you to actually adopt and flex yourself into multiple change domain, let's call them, easily. And by having this uniform experience, you can also guarantee that your service level remains the same no matter where you are within your transition path for a given application.
Yeah. Now, we have the cherry on top of the FSx for ONTAP, and it's this service called BlueXP Workload Factory. Richard, today let's go over what are the benefits of VMware Workload Factory, what it does for VMware.
Yeah. So for Workload Factory, for the VMware aspect, what we're really doing is we're going to help you figure out how to migrate your data right from VMware into either EC2 native with EBS and FSx ONTAP, or to VMC. We have both of those options. But what we're really doing is we're helping analyze your current VMware estate. We're helping to build these storage plans on how will you actually, I think this is great. I want to do one of these options. How do I get there, right? How do I start? Like, how do I do that plan, right? And so this tool takes you through that whole process of exploring your current infrastructure, analyzing that estate, building a deployment plan, and then giving you some optimized storage infrastructure plans to implement.
Okay. How about we do a demo, Richard?
Okay.
Show everyone what it is, what Workload Factory is, how it looks.
Sure. Okay. So this is the Workload Factory. It's console.workloads.netapp.com. I just want to state first, it's SaaS, right? So you can get to it right away. Anybody can sign up for it. So you guys on the call here, feel free to go ahead and go to console.workloads.netapp.com. Probably pay attention for now with what I'm going to show you. But right as soon as this call ends, go ahead and start playing around with it. So Workload Factory covers multiple different workloads. You see we have some storage, AI builders, and databases, and VMware, but VMware is the one we're going to concentrate on today. So I'm going to go straight to that one. So for VMware, we really have two options, right? We have a migration advisor for going to AWS native, and we also have one going to VMC. And in the near future, probably want something for EBS as well. But for today, I'm going to concentrate on doing the native compute migration advisor. So let's get started with that one. We have two options here. The first one is a quick assessment, and this just basically uses RV tools that are common way of gathering information about your VMware environment, and we can use that to help you do the plan. This is called a quick assessment because what it doesn't have is it does not have performance information. And so to really do that detailed plan, we can do it, but we had to make some assumptions about performance. So if we really want to get that full plan for a real live migration, right, you're going to want to do the detailed planning. So let's look at that one. The next step we're doing here is preparing. So on the right-hand side, there's a VMware data collector. And so essentially, this is like just a PowerShell script that you can download and run in your environment that will get all that data for us to help us make that plan. It's going to use PowerShell VMware commands to pull out all this data, including past historical data on your VMs. So once we have that, then it gives us a file that then we can upload into Workload Factory here. So let me just pull one up that I run before. This has all of that data that was run from on-prem. All right, and so first is going to give you a quick overview of how much VMs you have, right? So in this case, we have 276 powered on, 152 powered off, and this is the provision capacity of those VMs, and this is the utilized capacity. To move forward, right, we're going to have to provide some information. The first one is the region. So there's a couple of reasons we need this. One, just make sure that that region is available for you. And then two, which types of FSx ONTAP SKUs, for sizing the FSx and ONTAP system depends on the region as well as there's just different cost structures depending on which region you're in. The next big piece of data you have to do is you got to figure out is, do you want to look at provisioned or do you want to look at utilized VMs? Another one is we know from many years of on-prem for VMware environments that we see about a 33% cost savings, but sometimes that may vary slightly. And so we have a little thing here that helps you decide. So let's just say, for example, you know you have a lot of databases. Then that's going to drop it down to 20% because we don't see quite as much dedupe and compression savings with databases or database heavy workloads. And so, but for now, I'm going to just switch it back. Also, the information you might want to put in there is how much headroom, right? How much space do you have to grow, right? Once you've gone up. So we recommend 25%, but you can, play that a little tighter if you want. I mean, generally for enterprise grade deployments, we're going to want to use some type of snapshot protection. Right, we're going to the next step, which is the scoping. So for the scoping, what this is now said, hey, which ones do I want to take? And so by default, it's taking all the powered on. You can also do powered off if you want. You can also filter on what data center or what SDDC. Again, you don't have to move it all at once. So you could say, hey, I want to choose only one SDDC to move to do this particular plan for. And then also it gives you the estimated instance type that this VM will land on, right? We've got this information about the performance of the VM there. And so one would be based upon allocated resources would be the slightly larger one. But if we're looking at what it's actually using from the data that we grabbed, then that's the actual resource utilization. Then you might be able to get away with a smaller EC2 instance, right? So we're giving you that data here within the plan as well. Once we've done that, then we need to classify the data, right? We need to figure out kind of how we want to move it up. And one of the big things here is the performance, right, of the VMs. So we categorize these into standard volumes, capacity optimized volumes, and performance volumes. And then we have some different throughputs of how much IOPS each of those are, right, to reach those categories. For a performance optimized volume, the kind of key thing here is that we don't want to put a tiering policy on it that would move the data off of the SSD. We want to keep the data on the SSD tier. For a capacity optimized volume, the opposite of that is that we want to put as much of the data in the object tier as possible because it's basically cold data that's not accessed a lot and doesn't have high performance constraints. And so we want to save you money by putting it on that optimized tier. You can change this here, and then the rest are standard, which are kind of like in between, and they would have some type of like auto tiering policy set, which just means like after 30 some days or so of the data being cold, it will move it to the more cost-effective object tier. You can switch around with these if you want to, and then they'll basically move into standard if you don't want to like choose one of the other ones. Then here's kind of another really important part about this plan, and that is that it's a combination of EBS and FSX for ONTAP. At the bottom here, that's because the OS disk, EC2 is required to boot from EBS disk. And so all the OS disks that are coming up will have to go onto EBS. And that's why we see 276 volumes here that are going to EBS. But usually that is much smaller in size. So the bigger bang for your buck is going to come by moving a lot of the data into an iSCSI volume on FSXN, and we'll get all those great advantages that we talked about. And that's this 467 terabytes. And so then this says, just a thing of, hey, these VMs are going to go and migrate to FSX, and these volumes are not VMs. These volumes are going to migrate to FSX, and these volumes to EBS. And it shows you all the disk names and everything that it's going to take to move over. And then this is the package, right? We've now packaged up this data and taken all that data into account. Like, what were the VMs? How much power were they using? What were their CPUs? What was the storage on them, right? And we've taken all that data and then said, hey, this is what it will take to run this on a combination of EBS and FSX ONTAP. And all those parameters come into this calculation. And so here we see the utilized capacity, the amount of free space we calculated you need, and the amount of headroom. We also have detailed information about, let's just say, hey, we saw that there were low performer VMs, right? We're going to put a lot of those terabytes onto the objects tier, which is going to save us money. Also, we're going to be able to reduce about 154 terabytes out of your footprint. Down here at the bottom, we can see how we allocate those VMs across these FSXN systems and which volumes go to that as well. And then on the final page here, we first just show you an estimated savings, right? Compared to, hey, if you weren't using FSX for ONTAP, you wanted to do this re-platform, right? Then you would have to if you put it all in EBS, right? You're not going to get the advantages of dedupe and compression and moving the colder data object here, right? So we show the cost difference here at the very top. We then there's a detailed information about the deployment for the FSx ONTAP systems. So you can see that it's recommending 99 terabytes of SSD storage capacity. We predict that this amount of data will move to the capacity pool, and we need a 512 megabytes per second throughput on that FSx for ONTAP system. And so this gives you also the full calculated cost. For this plan, you can either download this as a report, a PDF, or you can also download an instance as a CSV file, which basically takes the other screen you saw with VM by VM and exactly where it's going and exactly which EC2 instances it would go to. And again, this would then all be plugged into whatever migration tools and planning that you're using. But now you know where things can go and how you can get them there with the best cost possible. Another thing that we can do with this workload factory real quick is that we came up with this plan of what this FSx should look like. Also within the workload factory, we can actually do the deployments. So you can create the file system here. You can plug in that same data of exactly what you want, the AZs, and you can actually read in your VPCs and your security groups where you actually want to place it. And for example, you can put in, let's say we said it to be 512 megabytes per second. Then you put that over here. You can either use Workload Factory to actually do your deployment exactly as was recommended, or you can also do CloudFormation, where you can get this and download that CloudFormation and hand it off to somebody else to deploy. And we also support Terraform. So we kind of take you from beginning to end. We do the whole plan, and we also have a way for you to know to exactly download and implement that exact FSx ONTAP configuration.
Wow, thank you. This is great. I have a question for you because I know a lot of people may have this question in their mind. How much does it cost Workload Factory? What's the cost?
Yeah, $0. It's absolutely free, right? This tool was created along with AWS. We developed it with them, and it's really to drive FSx ONTAP adoption with the best practices. So there's zero cost to that tool.
That's amazing. And it really comes out with a blueprint of what you need to do. So it's just a few minutes, a few clicks, and you have it. All right. So Ido, let's summarize because I think we have a small tasting of the capabilities of Workload Factory and its features. But I'd like, because I know this is also your baby, can you talk a little bit more about the benefits for VMware?
Yeah. So if we try and recap everything that we've discussed today, so there's a lot of decision points within this journey to actually modernize VMware workloads. As we mentioned, you can take on multiple parts and multiple partners here. When you're taking on a journey with AWS and you're going towards modernization of your VMware workloads, there are, again, a lot of challenges and a lot of decision points to make. We highlighted those, let's call them key elements, making FSx an attractive option to do this. It can be due to the robustness, the availability, durability that resembles what you have on premise, and you get the same cloud experience that allows you to support the beating heart of your organization in terms of data and applications. And it can be those cost-saving features that actually can make your business plan fit into your budget. What we actually went in and pulled within Workload Factory is we identified this planning challenge to actually understand what is required to go on through this journey of modernizing your workload, what is required from cloud storage perspective, and how can different services be offered. From the FSx ONTAP perspective, we actually pulled in all of this wisdom into a tool that actually automates this planning and also allows you to easily deploy. We haven't touched base on those items here, but Workload Factory actually also contains a very wide section of day two operations, allow you to later continue and manage your FSx for ONTAP, leverage all those functionalities. So Richard mentioned our part is also something that will be coming into Workload Factory, and additional features and functions within the tool. And actually that means that you get to operate your infrastructure and keep it well architected within the domain of best practices as you go along.
Yeah, I agree. And it just makes you, I think to summarize what Workload Factory does, it just makes your life easier. I think that's really what it does. So let's talk about the key takeaways because we've reached all of the content that we had planned for you today. The first one is VMware workloads, and we covered the options that are out there, both moving to another on-prem or modernizing, which is where we focus more of our, and we made more emphasis. And it's really just what you need to consider for that modernization journey. How FSx for ONTAP is a fully managed service from AWS that can provide the advanced and robust enterprise data management that you will need in the cloud, and gives you multi-protocol and automated storage scaling, tiering, deduplication, all of that good stuff. FSx for ONTAP also supports you throughout your modernization journey. No matter where you are in that journey, it can be your underlying storage for all that path. And finally, we went over BlueXP Workload Factory. We showed you a little demo of what it can do to give you from the configuration, the planning, the blueprint for your migration, for your workload. So this is kind of recapping everything that we covered today. Here are some resources that you will get this information. The QR code takes you to the BlueXP Workload Factory. Also, we shared with you the link in the chat. And with that, I think we can go and check the questions. Let's see. We have quite a few. So the first question, does BlueXP Workload Factory support hybrid cloud scenarios where some workloads remain on premises?
So yeah, first, very good question. So Workload Factory was actually designed to help implementation of FSxN in the AWS cloud environment for multiple workload use cases and scenarios. Still, Workload Factory is a part of the BlueXP platform that allows hybrid storage management with multiple data services. And Workload Factory is actually seamlessly integrated into BlueXP and is a part of those data services, which actually can be streamlined to create a full-blown hybrid cloud storage management experience. One thing that I would like to call out here in Workload Factory, and that's a good point that I failed to mention when you asked me about FSx for ONTAP around AWS Cloud and attached services. FSx for ONTAP can also be attached, for example, to Amazon Bedrock for AI chatbots and AI application data processing. As we all know, a lot of data resides on-premise and requires to get closer into those LLMs to actually be processed. And Workload Factory does contain a workflow to support customers leveraging ONTAP solutions on-premise to bring their data closer to a cloud environment and attach it to services such as Bedrock and Amazon Q for further analysis and creation of AI applications.
We have a question. Where can I get more information or free training about FSx and BlueXP? Richard?
Yeah, so obviously I think we usually get everybody that attends here and we'll record this question and you put in your company and all that kind of information. So we will definitely, for people that are interested, we will definitely be reaching back out to you guys to discuss this stuff in further detail.
Yeah, okay. Is there an extra cost for uploading and downloading data? I'm not sure the question is complete. Yeah, I guess it's uploading and downloading from the cloud, I guess.
So for uploading and downloading from a cloud, probably need to look at the hyperscale price book and different services and different scenarios. If this question refers to uploading and downloading information into Workload Factory, there is no cost incurred with that. So Workload Factory is complementary, and there is no additional access cost involved in any scenario apart from cases where you deploy an AWS service stack and then those services are part of your cloud account and are built into it.
Yeah, I would add on to that, right? That in general for the cloud, they make it a lot cheaper to get in there than get out of it. so take that into account in your planning. They usually allow you to move the data in, but if you then try to move data back out, almost all the cloud providers are going to have a level of cost with moving the data back out. So you do want to consider that in your planning for sure. And so maybe before you're, do some dev tests, right, to make sure that you really want to move there before, investing in it is what I would say.
Okay. There's another question about VMware license. Does Workload Factory give you a simulation on costs to run the hosts on FSx?
So when looking at deploying a managed VMware service within an AWS cloud, there are a couple of options, such as VMware Cloud on AWS. Unfortunately, for VMware Cloud on AWS, there is no authorization to publish the pricing publicly, and therefore Workload Factory avoids it. If you're looking on additional VMware cost optimization tools, it's also important to check out NetApp Data Infrastructure Insights that has a very strong offering around VMware assessment and optimization on-premise. When you're looking at migration for native AWS services and creating a business plan that actually compares on-prem pricing into cloud, so Workload Factory will provide the cloud part of the cost, relying on the user or any other assessment or complementary assessment that you have from AWS, such as OLA, to actually highlight the cost of licensing on-premise and the potential savings on top.
Okay. There's another question. It says, does AWS bill you, and what criteria is used to bill you after uploading workloads? I think this is more around the charges that you get when you're in the cloud. I guess this is the question. No.
So I guess I can take this one and say, well, slightly annoying answer, but it depends. So it actually depends on what you're deploying. So each AWS service has its own cost, and those costs are built on a different structure and on different terms. When deploying workloads on AWS, you actually take a couple of those AWS services and you connect them together in a well-architected manner to actually build a fully functioning workload stack. And each of those services has a cost. One great thing about Workload Factory is that it manages all of those costs and actually allows you to monitor this cost as one centralized entity and also optimize those costs. Workload Factory actually contains well-architected dashboard that allows you to monitor workloads and actually provides you with a tool to actually see how to optimize those costs. It can identify cost-saving opportunities and allow automatic remediation or infrastructure as code-based remediation to actually get back into a cost-optimal structure within the workloads that you're using in cloud.
Yeah. I would add just one thing here, Karen. So it's basically the resources that you use. So that's why you want to use them wisely, right? So every resource you use, whether it be EC2 instance or whether it be storage, right, FSx ONTAP or EBS. And just an example of that, right? If you're migrating your data up and you're going to EBS and you want to send that data to another availability zone, well, sending that data across availability zones will have an additional cost. But if you're using FSx for ONTAP, you get high availability across availability zones built in. then therefore you're not actually paying, you don't pay for the transfer cost of that data to exist in the other AZ. So, using FSx for ONTAP gives you a lot of these cost advantages in the cloud when you're really trying to watch your bill.
Okay, thank you for that, Richard and Ido. One last question: do we have something similar to Azure in Azure? I think.
So unfortunately, today the answer is no, but please stay tuned.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think with that, we've covered all the questions. Thank you very much for joining and accompanying us today. Stay tuned for our next iteration around VMware when the EBS product is launched, and we'll be covering that. So hope to see you there. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to be starting in a minute. So we'll give some time for people to join. And just in a minute, we will be starting. So hold on tight. We have a lot of things to share with you today. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today to join us, taking some time to listen to what we have to say around VMware workloads. Let's